Hey, this is Dan the Ninja, and I'm here to show you my new, but also old print, We Can No Longer Protect You Forever. So I originally drew this print back in 2014 for a screen print poster show taking place at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. As was my nature with most gig and event posters I was doing, I would make an art print version of it as well. Having been limited to the number of colors I could use for the gig poster as it was a client job, I didn't really make any changes to the original artwork for the art print version that I would do it myself before sending it off to the printer. It sort of was what it was. This was sort of the first of a series of semi-fantastic, dream-like mismatches of architecture and ruin that I still play with to this day. The prose quote titles I've used in my prints since the very beginning of my career suddenly were no longer hidden in the prints or existing as tiny text on the image, but literally now on full display and mounted as this huge sign on the structure. I tried something new with the sky that was charming, but didn't age particularly well with me. And as someone who prides themselves on interesting and tight separations, these now felt messy and rushed. That said, I loved the imagery then. I still love it now. It's one of my favorite prints I've done. But in the middle of the chaos and uncertainty of the world in my life right now, I just kind of wanted to hang out with an old friend for a couple days and see if I couldn't bring it more into the realm of my recent work. 6 years of learned tricks and personal development later. First and foremost, there's a dots per inch change, DPI. Screen printing is a photosensitive goo and a very, very fine mesh that gets exposed to the UV light to create a very binary stencil. There's either all ink or there is no ink. If you want to do tonal stuff for shading, think of a black and white photo, for example. You're in the land of halftones and dithering. I prefer dithering, meaning I'm using many, many, many tiny little random dots that are closer or farther apart to give the illusion of tone from a distance. Screen printing is inherently a medium of limitations, and one of those limitations classically was that single dot can only be so small. In the early to mid 2000s, I learned that the most I could push it was about 180 dpi, meaning 180 tiny dots per inch. In hindsight, it looks gritty, but it had a charm and it worked for me for a long time. I just sort of rode that number out until screen printing tech improved, probably in the early to mid 2010s. Exposures machines were better, emulsions were better, film printers were better, screens were finer. People were just getting better at it because they were being pushed to be better at it. The best shops in the country could do about 300 dpi on paper these days. Here's what 2 inches of 180 dpi versus 300 dpi looks like. It's a huge improvement, but it's still not perfect as generally there's a roll off on each side. Classic danger aside. If we dither a grayscale chart at 300 dpi, you get something that looks like this. Printable, but problematic. Single pixels cut out of the darkest areas, say the 90% column where there's a lot of ink coming through that will bleed slightly. Those tend to fill in. And single pixels acting as a mask in areas where there's a lot of open screen, say the 10% column, tends to blow out in the process of creating the physical screen in the first place because a hose is involved. Meaning generally anything 0 to 10 on a grayscale chart tends to be nothing, and anything 90 to 100% on a grayscale chart tends to be solid black. It's a thing, it's a medium of imperfections, you learn to adjust. End of classic danger aside. Anyways, the original print was 5 simple layers: a pink sky flood, a blue structure flood, a mid-blue purple blocky shading layer, the 180 dpi dark purple dithered tonal layer that added the darkest shadows to the building as well as the entirety of the sky texture, and then black. There wasn't much to it. It feels a little harsh to my eyeballs, the clouds a little cartoony. I love it, but it's just where I was at the time, and I'm somewhere different now. So now the print starts off with pretty much the same 2 base layers, a reddish pink sky flood followed by the blue structure flood. You'll notice that the sign is missing, because now it's redundant. A later solid opaque color is going to make the shapes of those letters, so having it twice is just unnecessary registration risks, which was a problem with the first printing. There was an error there. Next are 2 mid-tone purple-blue layers that are the start of many shading layers for this thing, but limited solely to the structure. These create the brightest highlights in a more painterly and soft way versus the original single layer, which was very hard. With this redone version, first things first, I really wanted to redo these clouds. I've been playing with more painterly techniques to do clouds in recent years, and they're starting to feel that proper balance of real but not too real. They shouldn't be photorealistic because it's sort of inherently an old school book illustration style, but they also shouldn't be like Mario Brothers clouds either. what was in the original print a single layer of rich purple is now 4 separate layers of that same ink that build out the cloud step by step, as well as add more complex shading and softness within the structure. One at 25% opacity, another at 25% opacity, one around 50% opacity, and then finally a layer that's opaque. And these are all the same dark purple color. Next is the line work layer, the only thing that I kept from the original print. There were some very minor tweaks to this, mostly just adding a little more thickness to the shadows behind some of the main beams and a few tightness things here and there, but I mostly wanted to leave the original line work illustration alone, just because I liked it. This is a very dark navy blue printed at about 80% opacity, so now the darkest areas of the print still only follow about 80% on grayscale chart. There's still plenty of room to go, leaving room for the final layer of texture and the hardest shadows. There's a little more detail in the bricks here, the shadows underneath, the stilt house structures, a couple additional beams cut out of this layer. It's grit and grime, it's fun. It gives it its warmth. So that's pretty much it. This new printing is available on my site now in a small for me edition of 120 in this original colorway. There may be another colorway of this once humanity returns to some kind of normality and I can go do shows and events or really anything where people are, which I can't. I'm in my basement now. As I mentioned in the last video, I lost everything in my work calendar when everything went nuts, so picking up a copy is a huge help to me and my family right now. So thanks all.